Everybody, it's the Mad Master here. I'm just going to do these three videos sequentially, more than likely. I forgot what my third one was going to be. The time I was Satanist, the time I was a communist. I'm trying to remember all this stuff. Right now, I'm kind of a libertarian in a lot of ways, just to be honest, because I just cannot deal with the governments telling people what to do at this point. I'll, out and out vote for Rand Paul next election if he became the nominee. But I said that 5 years ago too. I kind of circled back into that mind space because I saw all the corruption of the leftoids and stuff. Now that doesn't mean that I don't believe in a lot of left-wing things still. So I do believe in a socialized medical system. In fact, I'm going to say a little note about that. You look at Europe's Jabba Jabba Do passport. I'm not going to say what it is because verboten subjects on YouTube. They have prior immunity listed, or prior infection listed as one of the categories that you can get this thing. Honest to God truth, I looked at it. The EU has this. Do you think America would do that as far as these little patchwork passport things? I think because this is just a little hypothesis, maybe because it's more socialized, they're looking at things medically obviously they're authoritarian as fuck with regards to other things, but having that in that passport is very interesting, right? They're still influenced by the BP, I'll just call it BP, BIGPHARMA, a lot, but I'm just saying that this is a very interesting thing that I read, that it was on that passport. So I'm just a little note on that. So anyways, this is not what this is about. So in the late 90s, I'm just going to go through the whole story. In the late 90s, I was let's just say 96, 97, it was kind of mid to late 90s. I was getting into Aphex Twin, Joy Division, Sisters of Mercy, bands like that because of my friends, peer pressure, and then people were just like, metal's dead, and blah, 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 blah. And I went to this alternative school that, the word Hesher was thrown about a lot, about old 80s metalheads and Camaros and white trash and all this stuff. And we're so much better than that because we like this alternative music, even though we do much of the same thing as these fucking metalhead losers. We smoke pot in a car in a park, and do a lot of the same stuff, and fuck like rabbits and have teenage pregnancies, and later a lot of these people got to become heroin addicts and stuff. So it's like total hypocrisy, of course, because I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, which is oh, we're so much better than those other people. So even at this alternative school, you probably know what the fuck I'm talking about now if if you're from here. We're so much better than those illiterate metalheads. Oh my God. So it was a big influence, but the 90s were the worst time for metal. Watch my videos about that. 1995, the death of metal. I thought about doing an actual documentary about that. So anyways, but neither here nor there. But I was also kind of a Christian. Oh, I'm going to do another video about that too. That was the third video. I was a Satanist, I was a communist, I was a Christian. Pretty funny. So I was really scared of satanic metal, and this is what happened in late high school. I bought the Merciful Fate's Melissa. I listened to it. It was the senior year or something like that, because some of my friends were getting into that. One of my friends particularly was still into metal. He was getting Century Media stuff. At the time, this was a big deal. Relapse catalogs and shit. And he was getting into King Diamond and Manowar and stuff. It didn't permeate me until a year later. But anyways, in between, I don't know, it was 95, 96, 97. It was 95 or 96. Maybe it was earlier. But I went and bought a Merciful Fate CD, Melissa, on the bus and from the mall, and I drove, went back. I listened to it, and I was like, this is absolutely fucking brilliant. I love this, and I was in love with it right away. I was like, this is awesome. This is what happened, though. I was like, but it's so satanic. Oh my God, this is terrible. It's going to corrupt me. So I threw it away. I threw away the CD. So it was dumb. I was such a dork. So it was like 2 years later or something like that, that I was like, okay. So I started, one of my friends started to get into like Mortise because he liked some of his like industrial stuff, and like before Mortise did industrial, but like ambient, dark wave, whatever you want to call it. And he had Mortise, and Mortise was in this band called Emperor. At the same time, he had bought this Mortician CD, and he was like, oh, some of this stuff ain't bad. It's really dark. And I'm like, oh, that's cool, you know. And then there was this record store that opened that had a little section that was metal, you know, and it was like, oh, metal, well, you know, maybe some metal has this like edgy thing to it now. All these bands from coming from Norway and stuff that are coming out, you know. It was like, maybe metal's not that bad. I'm just like, okay, all right, that's cool, you know. And at the same time, I don't remember what happened, but I was like, at some point, I'm just like, one of my friends is just like getting the King Diamond, Man of War, and you know, Merciful Fate stuff. I'm just like, okay, well, if he's not adversely affected by it, I had a lot of really, you know, mental health struggles in my teenage years. So if he's not adversely affected by this, maybe I'll start buying these albums and checking them out. So I started buying Merciful Fate and King Diamond CDs, like maybe it was like late '96, early '97, and then I finally like got the courage to like get the first 3 albums that I got as when I was it was like February through April of 1997. I know the damn dates down to the date, you know. I bought Anathema's Eternity, Emperor's Anthems, or not, that wasn't out. What is it called? With their EP, Reverence EP. And what was the third one? Amorphous' Tales from the Thousand Lakes, and I bought that actually. Did I order that? I can't remember. So those are the 3 CDs that I bought in early 1997, and I was like, this is just, I don't know, man, this is good, because I loved Carcass, like 4 years before or whatever. I loved Carcass's artwork, and I sort of liked some death metal stuff. That was the rebirth of metal for me. So I was like, well, these guys are talking about some interesting things. I'm going to read some more stuff. So what happened was, I started reading more interviews and more, you know, started reading more books and stuff like that. And I got to reading like about Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan. And I had heard of it before because I watched the infamous Geraldo thing, which my grandmother used as a, you know, the Geraldo Satanic Panic special, which she used as kind of a thing to criticize my mother for buying me Iron Maiden records and stuff, you know, or tapes. But, you know, back like 8 years before or whatever. So, really interesting story. So, I started kind of getting into some of the ideas. I was like, this seems like it makes sense. And I started to understand. There was also something else that really influenced me, was an intro, the Avon books, or whatever it's called, the Simon Necronomicon. And it wasn't the Necronomicon that influenced me, but it was the introduction where it talked about one era's devils, or one era's gods as another era's devils, as they, you know, take over society and culture and kind of happen. So I was like, what is this force that influences the rebel? It's like, that's what Satan is, you know. And I was like, I identify with the rebel, you know, I identify with the contrarian, you know. So I got into Satanism. I never did any rituals, but I was like, I would consider myself sort of a Satanist, you know, at that point. And I was like, the reason why I don't know why I didn't do rituals. I don't know. I just didn't, you know, have I also believed in like the law of intention, attraction, or whatever too. You know, I tried stuff with that, but I didn't like do any kind of like satanic rituals. The one thing that I really did not like in some ways was the curse idea. Like, you have to curse your enemies and all this stuff. I'm just like, well, I just don't see the point. I think people curse themselves, you know, a lot of the times, because they do things kind of like a lot of these politicians getting impeached or having to resign or getting recalled right now because, you know, certain things they've done. You know, it's like people curse themselves. I believed too much in karma. In other words, I believe too much in karma to believe in the curse idea. I don't like the curse idea. I never did. I never will. In many ways, I'm like, curse someone. It's like, maybe it's a catharsis, right? But I don't like it. I just don't. I don't. But I do believe it. I still love. I mean, I loved like just the whole lore of Anton LaVey and everything that happened with him and all the stuff. I just was fascinated by it, fascinated by him as a person. I have that tape, the infamous videotape that came out like right before he died. Is like I don't know what it's called, but videos of him, and it was really fascinating to me. I still like him as a I still would have loved to like talk to him and hang out with him and stuff. He just seemed like a really fascinating person to just like talk to for hours about shit. I would have loved to. If he would have lived, it would have been awesome. I think he was a really interesting guy. He had a lot of issues too, and a lot of problems, and obviously character flaws and stuff. But overall, like I'm just saying, like I thought he was fascinating. So at this point, I don't identify as a Satanist. I think I have a lot of those tendencies, though, for sure. I still believe that through history there is this force of change that's chaotic, but it's like against the authorities or the establishment or the established gods or whatever, and it's like this dark mystical force. This is just how I interpreted Satanism at the time, and I still kind of do. So I sort of identify with that. I still could play that character. I still could have that mindset, but I would not at this point consider myself a Satanist, because I am not a Satanist. It's weird that I was also a communist at one point. Look at the previous video. And but I have that side. I definitely have that side. I think Glenn Danzig kind of talks about that too. Like, ironically enough, Glenn Danzig is done. My infamous video that got more views, almost as many views as like my Manowar, the Fall of Manowar video. It probably has the most views on my channel. But it's just like I will question people's career moves. I'm sorry if it's just making shitty music and you're contradicting your previous ethos on quality, then I will criticize you. Sorry, my quality, I just don't give a shit anymore. Like my new song Bone Crusher on my other channel, it's like the quality is pretty bad, but it was kind of on purpose. But anyways, yeah, I was a Satanist. I kind of scared a few family members with that too, because this is like I just got into this point where I was like, there was this one time I was driving with a certain relative, and there were crosses like on the side of the road. I was like, oh, I have to hide from it. I was like in this weird mode, like those crosses are really making me uncomfortable. It's like it was a vampire or something. I don't know. It was just late teens, early 20s. You just experiment with a lot of stuff, a lot of mindsets and stuff. So, but to this day, I still have a lot of respect for the Satanist thing in some ways, But I can't call myself a Satanist. I don't, worship. They don't worship Satan. LaVey and Satanism doesn't worship Satan, of course. But that I identify with that part of myself, that union, whatever, shadow self, or whatever you want to call it. That force of change, force of will. I still identify with that. In fact, I would say Thelema I probably like more now than Satanism, but Aleister Crowley and stuff, and like a lot of his ideas. But I like both of those guys. I thought they had a lot of good things to say. They were flawed because they were human, but I still think they had a lot of good things to say. I would hang out with Anton LaVey any day of the week if I had the chance to talk to him. He's just a fascinating guy. Music, I mean, just his opinions, and I still love his like books he did later in life with all these like editorial essays on stuff, hilarious stuff. I'm trying to find this one quote in one of those books about politicians that I quoted before. But yeah, I still like LaVey. So what happened with me is that I was kind of calmed down about all that stuff, and I was just like, yeah, well, I sort of believe in this. I kind of became sort of agnostic for a while because of these weird actual mystical experiences that I've had, that led me to believe this whole thing, this whole like weird dynamic with this woman that I met this was back in the late 90s. I saw this weird stuff happening, and it was really bizarre. And then after that, I was making all that up in my head. I must have. So I became more of an agnostic for a while, up until trying to remember when I kind of got out of that. Maybe I was around when I started to read about like the pickup stuff, and then I got into like the self-help thing and new age stuff as a result of that, because it's kind of all intertwined to some extent on a certain level. Earlier on it was, so that's when I got into that. But that's pretty much as far as like my flirtations with Satanism. I'm not offended when bands have satanic lyrics anymore. I'm not like scared of it or something like that. I'm just, I kind of, if it's too juvenile, I'm just like, well, they could write it more poetically and more from this philosophical, like Nietzsche or or Ayn Rand or whoever, influences on Satanism, by the way. They could write from these philosophical standpoints and all this stuff. But another thing about the black metal bands, though, was that they were really into nature and paganism too. So it's like getting back to nature, but you also had this individualistic thing, romantic, the romantic era of the 1800s. That's pretty much, that's spot on with that, which did influence Nazis, and that's why there's Nazi black metal too, of course. So, anyways, that's about all.